We want to welcome to the show today Dr. Jennifer Morse.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really enjoying getting to know this new program that I wasn't familiar with before, and I'm glad to be part of your series on justice.
You brought up the word justice. Why don't you tell the audience what injustices that our children are experiencing today because of this sexual revolution that we went through for the last several decades that have changed the mapping of this country?
Well, the way we look at it at the Ruth Institute is that every child is owed a relationship with both of their parents, if that's at all possible, and every person, without exception, is entitled to know their identity, know who they are, know their cultural heritage, their genetic heritage. And in order to secure those rights of children, you need stability between the mother and the father. That's the way you deliver a relationship with both parents, right? Because if mom and dad are quarreling, or they live on opposite sides of the country, or dad was a sperm donor, then the child is never going to know half of who they are and half of their identity. And so we consider an injustice to children for parents to be out of the picture without some unavoidable tragedy making that possible. And of course, many of the things that I've mentioned and that will come to your mind right away are not unavoidable. These are things that we have sanctioned through the law and social custom.
I know that the Catholic Church in 2013 gave you an award that was basically a global award in recognition for the things that you've done to promote the truth of the Word of God. In other words, that marriage is between a man and a woman for life.
Yes. That was one of our slogans.
People should be celibate until they're married.
One man, one woman for life. Yes. And it was an organization. It was a Catholic journalist organization that named me one of the top Catholic stars of 2013. And Pope Benedict and Pope Francis were both on that list. So I felt like that was pretty good company at that point. But yes, I mean, a lot of the things we teach are now sometimes regarded as exclusively Catholic, but I don't view it that way. I mean, everything we do is in keeping with the teachings of the Catholic Church, but at one time, everybody agreed on these things, So it's not by any means it's not my private property, it's not the Catholic Church's private property, it's the truth, You have to admit, if you just think about it, that if you only had sex with the person you were married to, it would solve a lot of problems, Yeah. I mean, when you think about out-of-wedlock childbearing and the problems that creates for children, if you think about multiple divorces and the infidelity that's so often behind the divorce, the thing that's driving the divorce, this is unjust to children, for dad to decide he wants a trophy wife, or for mom to decide, well, I've got a better deal. I found a guy who can support me better, so I'm gonna move on. That's unjust to the children, and people just accept it like it's nothing, and they don't realize that the reason this is all possible is because the state has made it possible. This is not you and me, a bunch of Bible thumpers imposing our views on people. The truth is that if you believe in justice for children, children are entitled to the stability of their parents' union. Well, children can't go take their parents to court and say, see here, get over here, straighten up. Children can't do that. The society has to create the structures that creates this stability that children need. And it's the state that has undermined those structures. The institution of no-fault divorce removed the presumption that marriage would be permanent. And I think everybody can figure that out. Oh, it's not really for life. It's until we're tired out. We're tired of each other. But it also removed the presumption that marriage would be sexually exclusive, because no longer is adultery any kind of problem. So the person who commits a marital fault of having a sweetie on the side, nobody cares. The law turns a blind eye to that. The law pretends that they can't determine fault. And so this is cultivating injustices that would have been unimaginable in the 1950s or the 1960s, or really in any age prior to our own.
So when would you say the sexual revolution really began in this country?
Well, a question like that is always complicated, because you can always keep looking back, and you end up at the Garden of Eden if you keep going back, because that's
right,
where it all comes from. But I would say that a couple of significant landmarks would be the Griswold versus Connecticut decision in 1965, which removed all ability of any state to regulate contraception in any way. and ultimately made contraception a right, which then led to Roe versus Wade, right? So that 1965 wouldn't be a bad place to start, but you have to understand, it took them 30 years to get that. You know, the sexual revolutionaries, Margaret Sanger, the forerunners of Planned Parenthood, they were working on that legislation. Year after year, they went into the Connecticut legislature. Year after year, they said, all we want to do, we just want this one little thing. All we want is to let married couples be able to use contraception if they have a serious health problem. And every year, basically the poor people, headed by the Catholic Church at that point, poor Catholic immigrants were like, we don't believe this. What are you talking about? This is not going to stop with that one little thing. And no, that's all we want. Of course, the day after the Griswold ruling, they're on the phone talking about abortion. They knew exactly where they were headed with that thing, But the point is, you can see the 1965 case as an important marker, but 30 years led up to it, So I guess that's how a social revolution would roll. It doesn't come in and it's not like an atomic bomb dropping or something like that. But so the groundwork was laid there all along. And I talk about this in my book. You can see the pattern and the way they did it. That pattern is repeated in one issue after another, one episode after another. A lot of the things that they pioneered, so to speak, with the contraception cases came back in the abortion cases and came back in the gay marriage cases and are being recycled yet again for the transgender issue, Same kinds of strategies over and over again.
Well, the way I say it is that the devil takes little bites at a time. He moves in to pervert the thought process of men and women a little at a time. And we've seen that happen in this great country that we live in, that where we're blessed with a foundation of the Declaration of Independence and a Constitution, that we all were created with unalienable rights, and that we had the right to believe in a creator who created us. And now we're passing these laws and these acts, and we're seeing this social movement that is attacking the non-existence of our creator. Mm-hmm. I mean, well, when you talk about, you mentioned the word transgender. When you talk about transgender, God created, and you brought it up, Adam and Eve, He created man and woman. Mm-hmm. So when you try to change what God created, we've got to be subject to a consideration of His wrath at some point. And I don't know, the scripture better than I do, but if you go into Romans chapter 1, verses 24 through 28, that we're moving as a nation towards the depravity of God, because at some point He turns us loose and says, all right, you're going to experience the consequences. And what you're telling me today about these injustices to the children because of this period of time, I look at that as consequences to these choices of these abominable acts that we as free people have chosen. Well, I'm just sharing with my thoughts with you, but what do you say to that?
But there's a lot to be said about it. One thing to say is that it's not just that we deny the Creator, we deny creation itself.
Yes.
You can look at the whole sexual revolution as an attack on the human body, right? Because we resent the body. The early phases were saying, we resent the fact that sex makes babies. We want to fix that. We want to be able to do whatever we want without having a baby show up. Well, you got to do a lot of tap dancing to make that work, Yeah. I mean, because that's not going to just flow naturally, and then the subsequent movements of redefining the sexual act and redefining marriage and now redefining the human body and your relationship to your own body, that's an attack on creation itself and the body. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that the consequences that we're seeing, and there are lots of negative consequences of the sexual revolution, you can think of it in terms of God punishing us, and we have it coming, there's no doubt about that. But you can also think about it that we're just reaping the natural consequences. He does not have to design a lightning bolt with my name on it. You just go out in the world and do this crazy stuff, and
You
stuff's
reap
going to
what you
happen.
sow.
Stuff's going to happen to you,
Right.
you know. And that's a kind of natural law thinking that, you know, a scientific mind should be able to see that.
Yeah.
And we at the Ruth Institute try very hard to keep as much scientific information out there as possible. We're an interfaith coalition, right? So we've got Catholics and Orthodox and Protestants and, you know, we got people all across the board who share these values, who can see that this isn't right, you know, and we got to do something about it. So the science is really on our side, and when you hear people say the science is settled, what they're really telling you is sit down and shut up. We don't want to talk about it anymore, you know, and that is not a good place to be.
Well, what's happened is we've allowed a segment of society that when they hear a view they disagree with, they immediately identify you as a homophobe, a xenophobe, a misogynist, a racist.
Right.
I mean, they want to identify you as one of those things, which is absolutely untruth, and it's nothing more than a political game. And so we've been facing that. But the truth is the truth.
Right.
And I respect the Ruth Institute because I know y'all funded studies to look at pedophilia in the church. You funded studies to look at whether or not you can relate homosexuality to pedophilia, and what is the probability that a homosexual will be a pedophile. I know that you've looked at that science.
We've looked at that stuff.
And of course,
no one wants to know.
And they don't want to know, and they don't want to believe.
Yeah.
But it's very scientific, and I believe you have it in publication now too.
So our material on the relationship between homosexuality and clergy sex abuse is work done in the Catholic Church. We got a lot of data.
Yeah.
You know, we've got data that was collected by the bishops. We've got data that's been gathered by journalists. There's several big data sets that have been gathered over the years. And our man, Father Paul Sullins, he's a priest who's also a sociologist. He analyzed this data. You know, we're Catholics. You know, it's not like we're out to bash the church. You know, we're trying to figure out what is going on here. Because my feeling is if we don't figure out what's going on and deal with it, nobody else is. Hollywood's not going to deal with it. The Boy Scouts can't deal with it. The public schools aren't going to deal with it. You know, the pedophilia is everywhere, you know. Yeah. So we're trying to look at this as objectively as we can, whether we like it or not, you know. And Father Sullins' work is definitive in this sense. Hunter, nobody even tries to refute him. Basically, the strategy has been to ignore him, you know. But what he shows is that there's a high correlation between men who self-identify as gay in the priesthood and the amount of clergy sex abuse. And you can watch it kind of rise and fall. And we still have some child sex abuse in the Catholic Church. We still have some. But it's not all homosexual anymore, you know. So I mean, any case is too many. We don't want any cases, right? But the character of it has changed, and that's important. You know, the post John Paul II era brought in more manly men, and there was less domination of homosexual ideology in the seminaries and so on. And so there is some improvement taking place. But you're not going to know that if you don't look. You know, and you gotta look. You gotta look.
I agree totally, and I'm not beating up and even trying to point out the Catholic Church.
Right.
You've done the work through the data that was available. But
That's a point.
It's the same thing in the Protestant Church. It's the same thing everywhere in our culture, and it takes scientists like yourself and truth seekers like yourself to do it. And I really commend Ruth Institute for what you've done. But you said something earlier that makes me want to address something that is so unpopular and makes people feel so uncomfortable, that we are now moving in that range in a country to where they want to make polygamy legal again. They want to make pedophilia legal in this country. I've seen that some of the provinces in Canada want to make bestiality legal. So how bizarre is it? And is God going to turn us over to ourselves or not? I believe that maybe, and we're talking at such a time when we've all gone through this coronavirus stay-at-home mandate. Maybe we have a reset where people are realizing the importance of family right now. Now, I understand the economic decision that was made was a bad decision to shut the world down out of fear, you know, because the Word tells us God doesn't give us a spirit of fear. He gives us a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. And we acted in a bad sort of way based upon bad information. We acted based upon information that came from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. And since I've mentioned Dr. Fauci and his relationship with Bill Gates, who have been the biggest funders of Planned Parenthood? Because I know you've opined, you've written on it, you've talked about who's funding all these abortions in this country.
So before we get there, I want to say one thing about the coronavirus.
Go ahead. I mean, it's just...
There's plenty to talk about here, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, you know, we have a wholesome respect for authority. We have a wholesome respect for expertise. But and as you can see, I'm in full compliance. We haven't been to the beauty parlor in, 2 months or whatever, 10 weeks or whatever. But we respect authority, we respect expertise, but so much has gone on to where we don't necessarily trust our leaders. And that is a fact in our present moment, that the public, so many people in the public are just thinking, are they trying, what are they doing? I don't know if I really believe all this, and we're commanded to obey lawful authority, so we don't want to just be throwing rocks at our leaders.
With one exception, when it goes beyond the Word of God.
But they have only themselves to blame, one could say, that people don't trust them.
Yeah.
So that's all. I don't want to say too much about it. But Planned Parenthood, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett has personally given over $1 billion to Planned Parenthood, to pro-abortion causes over the last 10 years, okay? George Soros, Bill Gates, many of the big foundations, you can see them financing Planned Parenthood directly, and a lot of the other subsidiary organizations that are, perhaps media organizations or legal organizations that are defending various parts of the sexual revolution. So there's an enormous amount of big money backing the sexual revolution. And I can just give you one very specific instance. There was the case in Texas, the women's whole health case, which was a Texas state law regulating abortion clinics and regulating them like other ambulatory care centers, right? And that was eventually overturned in the Supreme Court. Well, after it was overturned in the Supreme Court, then we find out that the research that was done to go into court and to fight against these regulations, that research had been financed by a whole series of liberal foundations. They had been working on that kind of material for about 10 years before that case ever came up. So when you look at that kind of deep pockets that the sexual revolution has, when you look at the kind of deep bench that they have compared to what we have to work with, and then you see the kind of forces that we're up against. It's not by any means a level playing field. The people who are fighting for even reasonable regulations of abortion clinics, never mind overturning Roe, let's just regulate them, like health and safety regulations. Even that is more than these people can stand, and they've got the money to fight back, and very often, all too often, prevail.
As a truth searcher like yourself and an academic, you're probably aware of what I'm aware of, and that 2/3 of your peer-reviewed studies of research lend their opinions and findings or conclusions to the direction of the funders of the research. So whoever's funding the research generally has a 2/3 chance of getting the results of the research in the direction that they want it. Mm-hmm. I just recently read where the Bill Gates Foundation, who is battling publicly with some well-known people about the vaccines that they're funding and the work they're doing in conjunction with Dr. Anthony Fauci, is the major funder of fact check. So in today's society and today's IT world, everybody thinks that they can immediately go to fact check to see whether a statement is true or not true. Well, who's funding fact check?
Right.
And so these are things that the viewers of this program and whatever the audience may be, and people that are listening need to realize what they're dealing with and who they're dealing with. The Buffetts and the Gates and the Soroses of the world are not, for saving the culture of America, for saving the First Amendment values that you and I believe that are God-created values to this country from the beginning of the time it was formed. There was a reason. We've seen during this recent several-month episode that you commented about not even being able to get your hair cut, that somehow that they found out that going to a liquor store was an essential, but going to church was not. I mean, they made the most crazy rules and regulations, and I realized that there were national recommendations, but there were also governors who made recommendations. And, you know, this country truly needs prayer, but we need to be Jameses. We need to be faith who are willing to work. And I really commend you on the work that you've done in the Ruth Institute. Tell the audience why Ruth. Why did you choose the name Ruth?
Well, okay, so when I founded this organization, I knew that I wanted it to have like a patron. I wanted it to be named after a person. I didn't want it just to be the marriage study think tank or something. You know, I wanted to have a person's name. So I'm thinking about it and praying about it and kind of kicking it around in my mind. And I also knew from the beginning that I didn't want it to be exclusively Catholic. So that rules out like, the Virgin Mary Club or something. You know, we can't do that. So I'm just ruminating on it, and literally on Epiphany, I had an epiphany that Ruth of the Bible is perfect because she valued her family. She put her family and loyalty and her new faith before what would have been comfortable and convenient for her. And everybody loves Ruth. You know, every religion you can think of pretty much loves Ruth. So she's not a barrier to anybody. You know, everybody can connect with her. And then, of course, that it all fell into place in my mind. My mother's name was Ruth, and so it just all was, completely perfect and the right thing to do. So that's how Ruth came into it.
That's great. Ruth was a Moabite. She wasn't even a Jew.
Exactly.
Her mother-in-law was a Jew, Naomi. And when she made the decision to go with her mother-in-law back to Jewish territory, I would say, she basically said, "Your God will be my God."
That's right.
And I'm gonna, and that's who she is. And then God put her with Boaz, and then the story goes on.
And they become ancestors of Jesus Christ. She's one of the few women mentioned in the genealogy.
In the genealogy, you're absolutely,
so that's pretty cool.
You're absolutely right.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, and also she said, "Your people will be my people." I say that to people all the time.
Yeah.
So your people are going to be my people. I know the viewers of this station are going to love the Ruth Institute, and I know we're going to get along with these viewers too. So your people are my people.
Well, that's great. I know you've done statistical analysis of all of the problems that have come out of this revolution in these past several decades that have affected children. Would you share some of that with us? The consequences of these bad actions. What have they done to these kids? And what are y'all doing to try to plow in there and educate victims that are now adults?
Yes.
Some that are still children, some that are now adults.
Yes.
What is the Ruth Institute doing?
Well, the Ruth Institute tries to look at this issue from the perspective of the people who've been harmed by it. Because when you're talking about the sexual revolution, you will always see some jolly promoter saying that the next great thing is going to be so great for everybody and there's not going to be any problems, and any problems are all airbrushed away, and when things go south, they lose interest in the person, and so we're like, well, there have been a lot of people harmed by this stuff. Why don't we get them a chance, So we talk about children of divorce. In fact, we put together this little pamphlet, "Do you know a survivor of the sexual revolution?" which is a rhetorical question. Everybody knows a survivor of the sexual revolution. So right at the top, children of divorce, reluctantly divorced persons, meaning abandoned spouses, people who would like to have stayed married, but their spouse left them, and under U.S. law, the government's always on the side of the person who wants the marriage the least, Yeah. We've got the donor-conceived person, people who never know one of their parents because it was a commercial transaction that is made anonymous by the state, the pornography addict and their families. Think about that. Think about what a problem pornography is. And for every addict, there's all their family members around them that are affected by that. Post-abortive people, men and women. There are many men who grieve the loss of their children, that they were either complicit in the abortion of their child or it took place against their will. You know, you never hear from them. You never hear their story, you know. People who are refugees, we call them refugees from the hookup culture, refugees from the LGBT lifestyle subculture. These are people who live that way, whether it's in the hookup culture, gay or straight, and have walked away from it, have turned their back on it. They have stories to tell. You never hear that. You never. In fact, those people get vilified in the media. You know, the ex-gays get beat up all the time. You know, it's amazing how much that happens.
Well, they're actually passing laws in California that you can't even counsel
That's right.
somebody that they can walk away from that
That's
lifestyle.
exactly right.
It's a crime if you counsel them to do
That's
that.
right. That's right. The therapists, the laws are written so vaguely that the therapists are afraid to even take these clients. I mean, in fact, when the whole COVID thing came out, we issued a press release about it, the Ruth Institute did, on the transgender issue, and said, you know what, this is not essential surgery. These surgeries should be put off, at least put off, and it gives people more time to consider what they're about to do, you know? And then we raised the question, in the light of these therapy bans that you're talking about, if a person who's desperate to go get their surgery done, if they're told you have to wait 6 months, are they going to be suicidal? I mean, we're all told they're going to be suicidal, and that's why the parents are pushed into it, and everybody's a rush to get it done so they don't kill themselves. So now we're making them wait. If a therapist goes to them and says, you know, you're going to be all right, it'll be okay. You know, is that therapist now illegally doing conversion therapy on them? Is that allowable? Under these very broad bans, broadly written bans. Now, of course, we never got an answer to that question, but it makes you think. If what is going on inside a therapist's office is being regulated by the state, that's not good. That can't be a good thing. The people who are demanding these bans do not want the competition from somebody who can say there's another way. There's another way to live.
I did note that some of your interviews with the press and maybe press releases during this COVID-19 that you had exchanged words with the state of New York and their treatment to the Samaritan Purse, as well as to their comments made about sexual activity to the citizens of New York. Would you comment on that little bit of that for us, please?
Well, okay, let's talk about Samaritan's Purse, first of all.
All right.
So Samaritan's Purse is an organization, Franklin Graham is the president of it, and they provide relief services all over the world and have done so for decades. And so they said, well, this is a pandemic, this is an emergency, we'll do what we always do, we'll show up and we'll help. So they set up emergency field hospitals in Central Park in New York City, and basically said, if you don't need a ventilator, we'll help, we'll take the overflow from the hospitals, we'll help. And so don't you know, the LGBT activists in that city basically said, well, these guys are haters, they're bigots, we don't want them in our city. Somebody on the New York City Council said as much, and basically, I mean, I wouldn't say they ran them out of town, but they came close to running them out of town. In the meantime, the New York City Department of Public Health put out a statement, a little PDF form early on in the COVID pandemic, telling people how to have sex during the pandemic, how to have safer sex, what are good sex practices during the pandemic. Now, you and I would think this would be a good time to tell people only have sex with the person you're married to. I mean, that would solve a lot of problems. But no, that is not what they said. They said, your safest sex partner, and I hope I don't offend the viewers here, but, because I know you're all nice people. Your safest sex partner is yourself, and basically advocated masturbation. And then they said something along the lines, if you If you're used to having sex online or meeting people online, you might want to consider online sex instead of in-person encounters. But at no time did they say, you know, you need to get that stinking app off your phone. You need to not be having sex with strangers. The Tinder app, the Grindr app, you need to take that off your phone and just knock it off. No way did they say that. They did not say that, which is, you know, when you think about what they're telling people they can't do, it's pretty astonishing that they have nothing to say. And then Dr. Fauci himself was interviewed by Vanity Fair. Somebody asked him point blank, you know, some of us are getting a little edgy, a little lonely. You know, what do you think about the dating apps, Dr. Fauci? And he kind of hemmed and hawed, and basically bottom line, he came out with, you know, everyone has their own tolerance for risk. So we issued a press release saying, gee, Dr. Fauci, really? Why can't we decide how much risk we're willing to take to visit grandma or to have a birthday party for children or to meet in the park or something like that? What do you mean that the public health establishment of this country, nobody, and maybe somebody said this and I just haven't heard it, but I literally have not heard anybody say, you know, the safest way to have sex during a pandemic is to have sex only with the person you're married to, and then keep your fly zipped, okay? Just stop it. I have not heard a single person say that. And now they're talking about contact tracing. Think about that. So they have no regard for people's privacy. They're willing to trace you all over town, but they're not willing to say, get the stinking Grindr app off your phone? Give me a break. You know, I mean, this is the kind of thing that makes people feel that their leaders are not being honest with them. You know, this is the kind of thing that makes us not trust what they're telling us. You know, come on, normal people can put two and two together here. These two things do not add up.
Well, to me, that was the biggest statement of hypocrisy that you could hear from Dr. Fauci, saying everybody has their tolerance for risk, but yet he will not say that word with respect to the economy of the world or the economy of the United States and the individuals about. That's right.
It's crazy.
We take a risk every day when we get in the car, and that risk is greater than one of us getting the COVID-19. It's just been really. We know that the I don't even want to call it disease. We know that the flu or the virus or whatever they ultimately describe it as can make people sick. It attacks their pulmonary and their breathing, and it's something that needs to be watched out for. We now know it really impacts the elderly. But there was never a risk assessment done. There was never anything done to really evaluate the risk, and that man knew the truth. And so he got covering for doing something that he should have never done, and that was to try to shut the whole world down, which they accomplished. And you know, there'll be people to speak on the subject matter better than me or you about what is the risk of a quarantine?
Right.
What is the risk of the so-called cure versus the so-called cause? And they never did it. And it's really devastated this country. But you know, we know God is good. We know God can take what the enemy means for destruction, and He can use it for His good. And as believers, you and I anticipate that will happen.
But only if we do our part.
That's
right.
Amen.
We can't just sit back and coast and say God's going to save us. No, he's been trying to help for some time. You know, one thing that I think that where the Ruth Institute actually does have some expertise, we don't do anything with infectious disease or anything like that. So, you know, I'm not going to talk to you about risk assessment. Right. I don't know that. But what I do know is that people need to be touched. Okay, people need to be in the physical presence of other people. We need that physical proximity. We need relationship. Think about it. Solitary confinement is a terrible punishment reserved only for the worst criminals, you know? And so we're cutting people off from their social lifeline. And there are a lot of people who are living on the edge mentally or emotionally. Some of them are going to go sailing right off the edge. And I can tell you that is happening, and that it's perfectly predictable that it would happen when you cut people off from their normal sorts of social support networks and tell people you can't hug each other, or, you know, don't get too close to people. You make people scared all the time. You know, there are going to be mental health consequences and physical health consequences from scaring people to death. You know, you should be able to figure that out. That's not rocket science.
Right. Dr. Morse, before we leave today, would you hold your books up and tell the audience what books you've recently released that could be very beneficial to them
sure.
if they ordered one?
Okay, so this is a book that's been out for a little while. It's called 101 Tips for a Happier Marriage. And a lot of the material in here is helpful for pretty much any kind of human relationship. There are tips on how to deal with criticism, how to ask for help, how to have reasonable expectations. All those kinds of things are very applicable in married life, but really throughout your life. So especially in this time when people are in particular need of social interaction and maybe an ability to let certain things roll off their back, because that's an important skill in married life, let things roll off. This book is particularly helpful for that.
What other books have you written recently?
Then we have a book. This book is called 101 Tips for Marrying the Right Person. And this is a book designed to assist people in the assessment process, whether they have a particular person in mind or whether they're just, you know, trying to prepare themselves for seeking a spouse. And within this book, we have specific, very practical tips, but we also incorporate information about things like cohabitation and pornography use and things like that, which we know, scientifically we know, are things that impede your ability to have a happier married life later on. So our counsel here is for people to take a good look at themselves, and if you are living with somebody, these are the kind of problems you might encounter when you later get married, because that's been studied and we know that. If you're not living with your sweetheart, don't move in. That's not really a good plan, you know. So and then there's some material on pornography and different things like that. So this is a helpful book, particularly for people who are seeking a spouse, but even for people who are just again thinking about having sane dating relationships and things like that.
And the last book that you have there?
So this is my book called The Sexual State, and the subtitle is How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and Why the Church Was Right All Along. And on the cover, you've got an image of St. Peter's Square, right side up, and upside down, you got a secular building, you know, looking like a courthouse or something like that. And the idea of the sexual state is that the sexual revolution was created and financed and supported by elites and by the state, with the help of the state. That many of the things that we think of as just, oh gosh, the march of history, oh gosh, the culture has changed. No, that's not really how it went down. The culture changed because laws changed. And the laws changed because people with a lot of money and a vested interest wanted them to change. And so over the course of the program that we just did, we mentioned a number of those things, including no-fault divorce, entirely the creation of the state. Third-party reproduction would be utterly impossible without the state. When somebody buys sperm or buys an egg or rents a womb, the only reason anybody does that transaction is because the state has guaranteed that the contract is going to define parenthood, not the body, not the genetics. The state has redefined parenthood. And, you know, obviously, average person can't just redefine what parenthood means, you know? So all of these things that we look at and say, gee, the sexual revolution, sexual mores have just changed. No, they didn't just change. They were changed. Somebody did that. And that's the theme of the sexual state. And there are lots and lots of examples in here of how that process works and of the many people who've been harmed by the sexual revolution.
Dr. Morse, earlier I asked you if you had statistics to indicate the adverse effects on these children from these consequential bad acts of the sexual revolution. Maybe that's a bad question. Maybe do you know what the long-term effect indicates?
Yes.
Could you give us some examples?
Yes, so the harms to children have been studied. Some have been studied a lot. So the harms of divorce per se has been studied extensively, okay? And one thing that you should know, we have this little pamphlet at the Ruth Institute called Counting the Casualties of the Sexual Revolution. And this is our rough and ready estimate of how many people we're talking about in each of these categories. So we estimated at the time this pamphlet was put together, about 45 million children of divorce of all ages are out there right now. 45 million people we're talking about. And when you talk about the harms that they experience that are long-term harms, one of our colleagues did a study that was basically a compilation of the research that has been done on it. His study, going through one thing after another, the collection of studies was 30 pages long with over 300 footnotes. Okay, so it's been studied a lot. And so I can't give you particular numbers on particular things, but I can give you, kind of a rough overview of some of the kinds of things that they have problems with that have been studied. Dying at a younger age, having fewer close friends, suffering academically, not finishing high school, having less parental supervision, feeling a lack of compassion from their church, having thoughts of suicide or violence, having problems forming their own relationships when they become adults. It just goes on and on. And, it's beyond doubt that divorce is harmful to children. There's just way too much evidence. Now, some of the other subjects that have come up, the more recent things, we've studied never married parents, single parents. So if you're born to unmarried parents, I never say single parent, because every child has two parents. They're just not married to each other. They're not together. So if you're born to unmarried parents, the odds are that your mother will have her next child will be born also with a person she's not married to, and a different guy. Okay, so then what you have is this whole phenomenon that demographers had to invent a new name for this, Hunter. It's called multi-partner fertility. Okay, multi-partner fertility, and they've had to invent new concepts just to study it, because the impact on the first child is very different than the impact on the last child. So the last child may be born into a union that turns out to be permanent. That last child gets to be with their mommy and daddy their whole life, but the first child has experienced multiple turnovers in their lives. So it's a mess. I mean, it's just a mess. And trying to figure it all out, is very difficult. The other group of children that we should say something about are the donor-conceived persons, because this is becoming a larger and larger group of people who are conceived through sperm donation. Actually, donation is not quite right. It's a purchase, right? They don't donate, and none of this is donated. It's all purchased. So your mother buys sperm from a man she doesn't know, or your father buys an egg and rents a womb from two women that they might not know. Those children have not been very thoroughly studied. And I did put together some research that was known, and what you can see is a list of physical problems just arising from IVF, the use of the in vitro fertilization. There are risks just associated with that. And then there's a bunch of psychological things that we believe are a problem, but nobody cares enough. I mean, think about it. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and nobody cares enough to ask the question, how are these kids doing 30 years later? What is it like to not know who your dad is? What is it like when you look at your family tree and you've got freckles and nobody else in that picture has freckles? What are we doing here? Nobody even knows. So, I wish I could tell you. And by the way, on our little chart here, counting the casualties, there are a few ones that have a little star there where it says no data. And what that means is we have no idea really how many donor-conceived persons there are, because we don't even ask. It's amazing to me.
Have you done any studies on gay couples that adopt children, on what the propensity of those adopted children will be to accept a gay lifestyle versus a heterosexual lifestyle?
So this is a question, the studies of children of same-sex parenting is really in its infancy. This is a very interesting question. I recently did an interview with a guy who specializes in this, a guy named Dr. Walter Shum, and our father Paul Sullins has also done some of this research as well. The question of heterosexual orientation is one that got studied quite a bit, and they are less likely, we don't know how much less likely, but they're less likely to self-identify as exclusively straight. That's what we know for sure. And then there are a number of other problems that are beginning to come to light. But I think the thing that your viewers really need to know is that in the run-up to the Obergefell decision, the research that was presented was simply not adequate for the weight that it was being asked to carry, for what we were being asked to believe. That the data and the studies were certainly not of rigorous enough quality to completely redefine parenthood, because that's the effect of what we did. Now, I interviewed Dr. Shum on my program, The Dr. J Show, which is on the Ruth Institute YouTube channel, so people can go and view that and hear what Dr. Shum had to say. But at every level, the image that has been created in the media, the children of same-sex parents are doing just fine. That is certainly not conclusively true. Let's put it that way. That's way, way overstated.
Tell the audience, if they want to watch your YouTube program again, how they can find it and how they can reach out to your website or contact you for information.
Yes, well, thank you. I would love that.
Would you do that real quick?
Yes.
And tell them?
Oh, I would love to hear from all of you. You can reach us at the Ruth Institute at our website, which is ruthinstitute.org. Very simple, ruthinstitute.org. We have an electronic newsletter that you can sign up for, and we send out stuff once a week. It's good to sign up for the electronic newsletter because no one controls that. Mark Zuckerberg can't shut us down for anything that we say in our newsletter. So you really do want to subscribe to the newsletter. But we do have a Facebook page, very active Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel, the Ruth Institute YouTube channel. And we have a weekly video podcast that we put out called The Dr. J Show. That's me, Dr. J. The Dr. J Show, where I interview people who have significant expertise in areas that will help us defend the family and to understand the importance of one man, one woman for life.
Well, I can't say how much I thank you for coming and sharing these thoughts today and these comments. And I know you're a truth seeker. You are always seeking the truth, and then you're educating people, and you're working with married couples, you're working with victims of this revolution, and you're giving your input that I know that God's using you in a big sort of way. So thank you again for coming.
Well,
God
you're
bless.
very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.